In 1918, Lincoln Pictures inadvertently made movie history when they reached out to an unknown novelist from South Dakota, Oscar Micheaux. Micheaux was always a maverick. In 1905, while most blacks were moving to the cities, he settled among white homesteaders in South Dakota. He was determined to build a 1,000-acre ranch and hoped that other blacks would follow. As Micheaux would later write in his book, The Conquest, I turned my face westward with the spirit of Horace Greeley. The words, "Go west, young man, and grow up with the country," ringing in my ears. Some years later, a severe drought ended Micheaux's career as a rancher, but he used his experience as the basis for a series of novels. The self-taught rancher, now writer, published the books himself and personally sold them door to door.
He didn't only sell the books to black people because the Homesteader was sold in South Dakota, and most of his neighbors were white in South Dakota. Micheaux was successful at promoting himself as a writer, and his books sold well.
Lincoln Pictures made a bid for the rights to one of Micheaux's novels, The Homesteader. Micheaux, with no previous experience, demanded the right to direct the film himself. Lincoln's owners called him an upstart, just a rough Negro who's got his hands on some cash. The deal fell through. But within a few months, Micheaux hired a cast, a crew, and a chauffeur who drove them from Chicago to the little town of Winner, South Dakota.
And I don't know what kind of a car it was, but the top was down. And these people were all in this car. And this is how they appeared. Now, I suppose they had all their gear in that car. I don't know. And kid-wise, I didn't have brains enough to even think about that, you know?
Micheaux and crew spent one day shooting location scenes on the Delphs family farm. The Homesteader, made in 1918, was the first feature-length race movie.
I remember them shooting the most from about like where you're shooting, because they stood between the windmill that stood just on the other side of that shed there and the barn.
People who were total strangers to you out here, and somebody came in with intelligence, somebody came in with an idea that at that time was way out there someplace. It wasn't a part of everyday life. Why, my dad would eat this up.
Over the next 30 years, Oscar Micheaux would make more race movies than any other director.
He wrote his own pictures and directed them and produced them and distributed them. He did it all.
Perhaps the most significant thing is that Micheaux proved that he could make them. You got to remember, he grew up in a time when it was believed that you couldn't spell if you were black. And he challenged that myth.
Not only was Micheaux the first black to make feature-length films, he was also the first to explore taboo racial subjects. With The Homesteader, he took on the most controversial subject of his time: interracial romance. Jean-Baptiste, a black man, falls in love with Agnes, who appears white. Their romance is doomed until it's discovered that Agnes has one drop of black blood, and their love affair is now acceptable. This was a theme that Micheaux would return to in film after film.
It was almost a personal obsession with Micheaux to constantly have these superficial conflicts in the films between light-skinned black people and dark-skinned black people.
He persisted in dealing with rather sensitive subject matter. He focuses on questions of color. He focuses on the need for an education. He focused on what blacks had to face in moving into the urban environment. He seemed to be more concerned about the message he wanted to put across in his films, very often which were his own sort of personal philosophy, his own personal take on the black experience.
Micheaux touched a nerve, and the audience responded. 1 year and 4 films later, he reported earnings of $40,000.
He was an exemplary businessman. He continued to work his trade in a capital-intensive enterprise with very little money, but with a wealth of skills, his ability to collar people, his ability to talk, his ability to make those films, to carry them around, to promote them, to exhibit them. He becomes a model for the independent black cinema movement that comes out of his shadow.
One of the greatest tasks of my life, wrote Micheaux, has been to teach that the colored man can be anything. The Symbol of the Unconquered, a newly discovered 1920 Micheaux production, once again expressed his belief that the greatest opportunity for a black man existed on the frontier. Through hard work and clean living, Micheaux's hero, a diligent prospector, overcomes disaster and wins in love.
As Micheaux used to say, "I'm helping the Negro," he would say. In other words, a lot of these people are trying to keep us down, but I'm helping elevate our people.
Popular as these films were, it was hard for race movies to make money. Every producer cut corners, but Oscar Micheaux's talent for penny pinching was legendary.
In the office came a lady with a beautiful squirrel coat. He had her go into another room because the minute he saw the squirrel coat, he felt to himself, "I'm going to have Shingsy get into that coat and take her downstairs and have her photographed coming out of this building," which he did. We did it hurriedly because he didn't want the lady to know her coat was out of the building. And after which we came back in, and he never let on. And that was just one of the little tricks he had in getting pieces of film together, which he would use in many, many pictures. I don't know, I never knew where they were used, but I know that he had them compiled.
With the arrival of talkies in 1927, production costs skyrocketed. The race movie industry was dealt a near-fatal blow. When the crash came in 1929, black-owned race movie companies, already vulnerable, all but disappeared. Micheaux barely hung on.
After he was bankrupt a couple of times, doing it like everybody else did it, he went to Frank Schiffman, who owned the Apollo. And they'd give him the advance money because they knew they would get it back in their 3 Harlem theaters.
With his new white partners, Oscar Micheaux went on to make The Exile in 1931.
You caused me to leave school. You taught me to smoke that those filthy reapers, to drink, to gamble, to do the many evil things that have ruined me. I wanted to finish my education. I wanted my degree.
Oh, will you hush? For God's sake, hush! Oh, you set me crazy. I don't want to hear no more about education. Education! We've got too many educated Negroes now in this country, loaded down with degrees and starving to death.
Forced to adapt to a shrinking market, Oscar Micheaux began making gangster films and mystery thrillers like Murder in Harlem. He even came from behind the camera to play a bit part as a detective.
That tall Negro did this. He will try to lay it on the knife.
Oscar Micheaux, he did everything fast, quickly, because his money was limited. He didn't have any money. But everybody just went along with him because they wanted to be in the pictures, you know, so they just went along with him.
While black westerns portrayed a romantic view of life, Micheaux's films continued to scold, presenting a vision that was both critical and disturbing.
Why is it that so many, most all of our men, when they go into business, it's got to be a crap game, a numbers bank, or a policy shop? Why can't they go into some kind of legitimate business like white people?
They could, but they've made no study of economics. Their idea of success is to seek the line of least resistance. The Negro hates to think. He's a stranger to planning.
I guess you're right.
I guess I think too much, and plan too much also. But after viewing the failure of our group, for we are failures, it seems that we should go right back to the beginning and start all over again. That's what I've decided to do.
You mean?
I'm going to buy a farm and start at the beginning.
With God's stepchildren, it became clear that Micheaux was out of touch with a new generation of moviegoers. Micheaux was also accused of ridiculing dark-skinned Negroes.
Oh, Mama, look. Who is that with Jimmy? Oh, what makes him so funny looking?
That's Clyde Wade, Jimmy's friend, whom we want you to meet.
You mean that? That's the man he's been talking about?
Sure.
And he wants you to like that? That person? Oh, Mama, I don't want anybody who looks like that. Oh,
In some cities, black protesters even forced him to withdraw the film.
He might hear you.
By the 40s, it was clear the type of race movies Oscar Micheaux was famous for no longer had a future. Oscar Micheaux tried to make a comeback. After the war, he came out of retirement to make The Betrayal. In this film, he resurrected the same story of an interracial romance saved by one drop of black blood. New York critics panned the film. On Broadway, the movie closed within days. But at local theaters, black audiences stood in line to see it. In 1951, while on the road trying to promote his movies, Oscar Micheaux died. In a career that spanned 30 years, Oscar Micheaux produced more than 40 motion pictures.